Hello friend, welcome back to my channel. God bless you. For the news update, please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. Imagine a society in which no single power controls the regulations governing international trade, where a country has the courage to stand strong and declare its independence using information, strategy, and vision rather than threats or weapons. We look at a story today that is changing the fundamentals of international economics. An action so audacious that the world has taken notice. It is a tale of bravery, vision, and the steadfast conviction that a country can shape its own future. In the minutes that follow, you will see how one choice may inspire millions to believe in the power of their own decisions, challenge entrenched powers, and have an impact across continents. This is about more than simply money and trade, so stay with us. This is about resilience, leadership, and the strength of having the guts to think beyond the box. You will comprehend why some choices are more than just chessboard plays by the end of this adventure. These are brilliant moves that permanently alter the course of the game. India's audacious currency policy is being, since it changes the way that international trade has been conducted for decades, it is regarded as one of the most significant decisions made in recent years. The dollar's supremacy in global markets was long thought to be unassailable. In order to safeguard its imports, exports, and even vital financial reserves, every country, whether powerful or developing, mostly relied on the dollar. However, India has taken actions that put the rupee at the forefront of strategic trade decisions through deliberate economic maneuvering. This is not merely switching from one currency to another. The goal is to establish a structure that will make India immune to changes in foreign exchange markets that are dominated by more powerful nations. India is building its own economic identity while lowering its reliance on the dollar by promoting bilateral and regional commerce in rupees. This approach is not only financially sound, but also very political, since it shows the world that India has faith in its own economic might. Countries who earlier viewed India as a developing but reliant economy are now observing a nation that has the guts to reject pressure from the outside world and embrace independence. This strategy's ability to empower Indian firms is among its most significant features. The ability to settle accounts in rupees helps importers and exporters stabilize their financial planning and protects them from the volatile fluctuations of dollar-driven markets. Additionally, it increases the rupee's demand internationally since foreign trading partners have an incentive to own and utilize Indian money. Additionally, a move like this puts indirect pressure on bigger economies that have waged trade wars using currency domination. India is creating its own set of norms based on justice and respect for one another in commercial interactions, rather than being compelled to conform to international regulations that have been drafted by others. Additionally, this approach allows India greater flexibility to handle crises, whether they involve tariffs or penalties, or abrupt shifts in global markets. India is demonstrating that it no longer wants to play a passive role in determining the global trade system by diversifying its economic risks. Essentially, there is more to this audacious currency plan than just economics. It stands for foresight, self-assurance, and a reluctance to submit to powers outside its boundaries. India is taking on a role that many thought could only be filled by superpowers from around the world. A position that could determine not just the course of trade between India and the global balance of financial power. When India's currency strategy is seen in the context of the US trade war, the effect on US tariff measures becomes evident. Tariffs have been a weapon used by the US for years to sway trade balances in its favor and coerce other countries into submission. Global repercussions resulted from the imposition of tariffs on steel, technology, and other imports, forcing the majority of nations to adapt. However, India's choice to strengthen the currency and promote global trade presents a problem that tariffs cannot resolve on their own. India weakens one of the fundamental pillars around which tariff power is based by decreasing its reliance on the dollar. America's tasks presume that nations must interact with the US according to its norms, utilizing its currency and economic principles. However, the efficacy of those tariffs starts to decline as trade starts to change to a system where the rupee becomes an alternate route. Fade. This change goes beyond theory. It is highly strategic and pragmatic. The impact of US tariff increases is lessened if Indian exporters and trading partners deal in rupees. The old cycle, in which America could levy taxes and make other countries bear the brunt of the shock due to its reliance on the currency, no longer works. India has instead erected a barrier to safeguard its companies and customers. This lessens the impact of tariffs as anticipated and demonstrates India's ability to create countermeasures that demonstrate resiliency in the face of global economic bullying by being both aggressive and defensive in nature. This action has an impact outside of India as well. Other countries start to realize that there is an alternative, particularly developing economies that are frequently the focus of tariff policy. India can start looking into comparable options if it can carry out significant transactions in its own currency. This increases the strain on the US since tariffs are the most efficient as long as there is just one financial control system in place worldwide. The leverage of tariffs begins to dissipate as soon as cracks develop in that structure. Therefore, India's choice goes beyond only preserving itself. It aims to spur a movement in which more countries recognize that they can combat the economic disparities brought about by globalization. This presents a problem for the US. Results may no longer be guaranteed by doubling tariffs. The trend toward local currencies around the world is one of the India's recent strategy, and the most significant developments of this age underscore the importance of this change. For many years, a single financial system dominated the world, with the US dollar being regarded as the most important means of exchange and settlement. Everything was valued and paid for in US dollars, whether it was raw commodities, technology, or oil. Because nations were forced to adhere to a system that revolved around this, the United States gained both political and financial clout around the currency of one country. India's actions are not merely a token gesture to strengthen the rupee. Rather, they are part of a worldwide trend in which nations are using their own currencies to regain control over their commerce. Across continents, this change is already apparent. Transactions in their home currencies are becoming more and more popular among countries like Brazil, China, Russia, and those in regional blocs. The explanation is straightforward. They are shielded from outside fluctuations by it, protects them from, imposes penalties, and fortifies their own economic systems. Given the size of its economy and the scope of its trade networks, India's involvement in this trend lends it much greater credence. A movement that is no longer isolated but rather worldwide gains momentum when a country with India's importance chooses to lessen its reliance on the dollar, inspiring others to do the same. This makes a strong argument that multipolar trade systems can succeed and that a single currency monopoly is not inevitable. There are many advantages for India in embracing this change. Trading in rupees makes firms more secure and predictable by preventing local markets from being destabilized by changes in the value of the dollar. Transaction expenses and the ongoing requirement for dollar reserves, which formerly depleted national resources, are decreased. More significantly, it supports the notion that India is an active creator of the world system rather than a passive participant in it. The self-assurance that results from this level of independence resonates not, demonstrating both domestically and globally that India has the drive and vision to take the lead in economic innovation. Sovereignty and dignity are also important aspects of this worldwide transition. Many nations feel as though they are giving up some of their independence when they must rely on foreign currencies to buy and sell things. They feel more in control of their futures when they go toward local currencies. India's audacity reinforces this message and speeds up a shift that could determine the course of the planet. Trade for many years to come, where balance takes the place of reliance and justice takes the place of dominance. India's long-held goal of economic independence has been molded by years of hardship, change, and tenacity. However, that goal is now closer to reality thanks to the new currency policy. GDP growth and wealth reserves are not the only indicators of economic independence. It refers to a country's capacity to act independently, trade fearlessly, and make choices independent of outside pressures. India has demonstrated that it is prepared to forge its own path in the global economy by enhancing the role of the rupee in cross-border trade. There is more to this change than just money management. It is about taking back control of a system that for many years compelled developing countries to continue relying on international exchange rates and outside markets. The protection this action offers from worldwide financial instability is among its greatest benefits. When economies and the dollar are closely linked, any change. Countries thousands of miles away are impacted by the shock wave created by American monetary policy. India has frequently experienced these knock-on effects, where local markets are destabilized by abrupt changes in interest rates or tariff decisions made in Washington. India protects itself from these erratic shocks by trading in rupees. When decisions made in one capital no longer determine the everyday lives of millions of people living in other cities, this is an example of economic independence in action. For Indian companies, this liberty is transforming. Exporters no longer have to worry about unexpected drops in dollar values or the expense of currency conversion, which reduces their earnings. Knowing that their trade agreements won't crumble under the weight of currency manipulation allows importers to plan with confidence. The demand for the rupee rises internationally at the same time, which benefits the Indian economy in and of itself. India's influence in determining the terms of commerce increases with the number of partners who consent to transact in rupees. This is sovereignty demonstrated via the actual workings of international trade, not through statements or symbolic actions. This independence has a psychological component in addition to an economic one. Many developing nations have been silently living under the belief that they cannot prosper without relying on superpowers for decades. That narrative is broken by India's example. It teaches its citizens and the rest of the world that real progress is made by believing in one's own strength rather than caving in to outside pressure. For this reason, the rupee's masterstroke is regarded as a turning point, a resounding declaration that India will henceforth confidently and resolutely determine its own future rather than allowing it to be dictated by others. Given the intricate network of the global economy, where even minor changes can have far-reaching effects, the ripple impact on international markets is arguably one of the most intriguing results of India's rupee-centered strategy. When a nation as large as India, with its enormous population and fast expanding, when an economy chooses to make its own currency the focal point of global trade, it invariably compels partners, investors, and rivals to reconsider their stances. Patterns, predictability, and trust are the foundation of the global markets. And those patterns were maintained for decades by the dollar, which acted as an anchor. Not in a careless way, but with the conscious goal of creating a more balanced system, India's action upsets that anchor. Investors start recalculating risk right away, and chances when these shifts take place. Global banks and financial institutions must think about keeping rupees in their reserves if more trade is done in them, as this alters the flow of capital. Once secondary currencies suddenly gain value, generating new demand and diversifying investment portfolios. This implies increased international interest in India's markets, bonds, and long-term economic goals. Even more reverberation occurs when other developing economies. After witnessing India's audacity, other countries began experimenting with comparable regulations, further complicating international trade. Rivals are compelled to pay notice, particularly those accustomed to dominating financial structures. Currency supremacy is a crucial component of the geopolitical power of the United States and its allies, and any dilution of such dominance reduces the absoluteness of their control. However, trading partners that have long been exposed to dollar fluctuations and the expense of currency conversion, volatility view India's action as a reprieve. Adopting a rupee-based system is not limited to India. The goal is to alleviate their own financial burdens. There is some roughness to this ripple effect. There will be swings, cautious responses, and even pushback from people who are afraid of losing control of traditional institutions since global markets are sensitive to uncertainty. But as new norms become established, stability eventually appears. Additionally, India's persistent efforts to promote its currency will be crucial part in forming that stability. A more multipolar global economy is reflected in the wider effect of a slow rebalancing of financial power, where trust is distributed among many currencies rather than centered on just one. Therefore, India's move is not an isolated action. India's masterstroke with the rupee is a powerful and inspirational message to emerging economies, demonstrating that independence and dignity can always be carved out in a world dominated by established powers. Smaller and developing countries have been feeling stuck in a system for decades, forced to trade in foreign currencies, usually the US dollar, which leaves them open to decisions made far away. Sanctions, tariff conflicts, and abrupt changes over which they had no influence frequently fell most heavily on these nations. India is sending a message that reliance is not inevitable by promoting the rupee as a legitimate trading tool. It demonstrates that with bravery, foresight, and with careful design, countries may create financial systems that put their citizens first and protect their economy from external shocks. This is a profoundly motivating lesson for many emerging economies, in addition to being a technical or financial one. It demonstrates that political domination and military strength are not necessarily necessary to challenge established regimes. It occasionally calls for clever tactics that reinterpret the game's rules. By coordinating commerce with its own currency, India has shown that it can not only shield itself from outside influences while also igniting a movement that would replace coercion and dominance for nations in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America with justice and balance. This move provides a useful model. They are encouraged to try similar tactics adapted to their own situation after witnessing the success of a country with similar development issues. The overarching takeaway is that economic sovereignty is attainable. No nation, no matter how big or how far along development, ought to think that it is doomed to be a passive participant in a system that frequently works against them. India's audacity inspires others to be innovative, have faith in their own currencies, and negotiate trade agreements that accurately represent their worth. Over time, the global financial power balance may change to become more distributed and egalitarian as a result of emerging economies' collective awakening. The hope this message conveys is what gives it even greater significance. Rather than considering world powers as unquestionably, rising economies can now see themselves as collaborators in changing the course of history. India's masterful use of the rupee extends beyond its own development. It's about creating a path for others to follow. It sends a message to all developing countries that the time to rise is now and that they, too, can build a future where their voices are heard in the international economic system if they dare to believe in their own abilities. To sum up, India's audacious decision to concentrate international trade around the rupee is more than a financial plan. It is a declaration of bravery, vision, and independence. It illustrates how a country can upend established standards without resorting to violence in order to safeguard its economy, empower its companies, and motivate the rest of the globe. This brilliant move, which instead relies on knowledge and forethought, not only improves India's standing in the international market but also sends a strong message to developing nations. Those who are willing to take action can change the rules of the game and achieve independence and dignity. Firmly, India is creating a future where commerce is more equitable, currencies are respected, and countries can stand tall on their own terms by embracing its own power and inspiring others to follow suit. Remember that every daring stride forward necessitates vision, patience, and unflinching drive as we look back on this incredible trip. I hope this tale of tenacity and strategic genius encourages you to take on obstacles head-on, believe in your own ability, and constantly strive for solutions that empower rather than rely. We appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this amazing period in the history of economics and international trade, and we wish you luck in your pursuits.